Recording. Good morning, everyone. This is the August 12, 2022 meeting of the St. Joseph County Election Board. My name is Chuck Leone, and I am the chair of the board. Let us start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started this morning, I'd like to just take a moment of silence to remember Zach Potts and all others who were affected with the terrible automobile crash that recently occurred and deprived us of a number of our local leaders and participants. Zach, as you know, was a regular participant here at the election board proceedings. Thank you. The item on the agenda today is the challenge hearing brought by Ted Booker, challenging the candidacy of Mike Castellan for St. Joseph County Assessor. I do want to say before we get started, there's been a request to add a few items on the agenda. They will occur after the hearing. And they're all very quick items that have to do with just kind of updates on processes that we're going through. One has to do with taking a quick look at the ballot handling procedure and kind of where we are on that process, making sure that we're doing it right. The next will be the issue of video recording of election, related to the request that Ben put in, and kind of where that is going and where that's proceeding. And there's also the question of ballot room protocol. That was an issue that came up related to keys to the ballot room, taking a look at our information gathering process. So we'll talk about those, but those will all be after. And also I want to set a date for our next meeting. So those four items will be at the end of the hearing. So again, we'll go to the first item of business under new business, which is the candidate challenge hearing. It's brought by Ted Booker against Mike Castellan, and it's based on the allegation that Mr. Castellan has not met the residency requirements that are set forth in the Indiana Constitution and in the Indiana Code to be a candidate for St. Joseph County Assessor. Those are both very brief sections, and let me just briefly read what those are. So the first is in the Indiana Constitution. It's Article 6, I believe it is Section 4. It says, "No person shall be elected or appointed as county officer who is not an elector of the county and who has not been an inhabitant of the county 1 year next preceding his election or appointment." The statutory provision is found in Indiana Code 38123, entitled County Assessor. It says a candidate for the office of county assessor must satisfy the following. The candidate must have resided in the county for at least 1 year before the election, as provided in Article 6, Section 4 of the Constitution of the State of Indiana. There is a second subsection that relates to owning real property. That is not an issue in this particular hearing today.
Can I ask, Mr. Leone, why isn't that an issue?
I don't believe it was brought up, the real property ownership. I don't believe that was brought up as an issue.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and deal with a few preliminary matters first. We have a pending motion to dismiss submitted by Mr. Masters initially when he first got involved in the case. We're going to deny the motion at this time without prejudice to renewal, and certainly everything that has been submitted in that motion can be considered. I know that there's argument in there together with some exhibits attached, and we'll treat those as exhibits at the hearing. At this point, I'd like to hear either from the parties or any of the board members if there are any procedural objections to the proceedings as they have gone to date with respect to notice or any other procedural defect that any of you are aware of in proceedings. And let me ask you first, Mr. Booker?
No.
Okay, Mr. Booker responds no. Mr. Masters, on behalf of Mr. Castellan? No. Okay, no objections. And board members? And no objections. And Rita? No objections. And I have no objections. Thank you. Both parties have submitted packets, if you will, of evidentiary material. The evidentiary material includes some items that are public records, some items that are gathered from social media, some items that are related to personal documents, and so on. I would like to, at this point, consider all of these matters as evidence, subject to the objection of any party. Let me ask Mr. Booker first, do you have any objection to any of the documents that have been submitted thus far?
No.
Okay, no objections. Mr. Masters?
I object to exhibits A and B submitted by the challenger as being irrelevant to the issue of residency.
Okay, your objection is noted and is overruled at this point. The board will consider any matter to determine its weight or its relevancy as it would be done in a trial court. Thank you. But your objection is preserved. Any other objections as it relates to the evidence? We will then consider all of the evidentiary material. Now, this would include the original filing by Mr. Castellan, which was his cover letter or email, and the exhibits with it, and together with the CAN1 form, which was submitted a day or two later, together with the packet of materials that he submitted as part of the evidence in this hearing to be considered by the board and given such weight as it deemed appropriate, and the materials submitted by Mr. Masters on behalf of Mr. Castellan, which include the motion to dismiss, which contains certain arguments and citations to case law, together with certain exhibits that were attached to the motion to dismiss, together with a packet of materials which were submitted, I believe it was last Friday, thank you for that, as part of the evidentiary record in this case. Yes, Mr. Masters.
Just to clarify the record, you referred to the CN1 and a number of other things filed by Mr. Castellan, but you were looking over here at Mr. Booker.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Mr. Booker.
You meant Mr. Booker?
I meant Mr. Booker, yep. Thank you for correcting me. So at this point, those will all then be considered part of the record in this case. We are recording the proceedings today, and those recordings, I believe, will be available after the hearing.
Mr. Leone, would you like to bring Mr. Masters and Mr. Booker up to the table so we can have a
Yes.
recording of their...
So why don't, Mr. Booker, why don't you come up over on this side, and Mr. Masters and Mr. Castellan on this side. We'll have access to the microphones, and I think that'll be easier for purposes of recording. For use of during the proceedings, it would be good if you could be close to the microphone so that we capture. And if anyone is going to be testifying, I think it would be best to do that from the podium, or if you intend to make a statement, that'll take some time. That way we can capture the video as well as the audio.
Okay.
Are we ready to proceed then? Parties ready to proceed? Mr. Booker? Mr. Booker, ready? And Mr. Masters?
I am.
All right, Mr. Booker, this is the case that you brought, so you may proceed. And if you're going to present a statement or any kind of testimony, why don't you do it from the podium behind you, because then
Okay.
it'll be
I
captured
do-
on video.
Yep, I do have a statement to present, so I'll go ahead and do that.
That would be great, thank you.
Sorry, can we just do an overview of what sort of the hearing will look like? Just kind of a roadmap?
Sure. So this will proceed like any type of informal judicial proceeding, because we're deciding a case, if you will, that has a challenge that has been brought. In the case brought by Mr. Booker, the issues have been set out as to the issues of residency. The procedure will be that Mr. Booker will be able to present his case to the extent there is testimony. You'll be allowed to be cross-examined by Mr. Masters on that issue. And then after Mr. Masters is finished, the board members will also have an opportunity to ask questions of you. At that point, if you have any other witnesses, you can present those. And then when you're complete, then we'll go ahead and move on to Mr. Castellan's case. And we'll use the same procedure with the other party. You'll be allowed to cross-examine Mr. Castellan, and then board members may ask questions as well. And then at that point, when the parties are complete with their presentations, we will start the review process. If we're long into this, we may take a short break before we actually start the deliberations. The deliberations are to be done in an open meeting, so we will discuss it, the evidence, the documents, any testimony that is presented, and compare them and try to weigh them in ways that help us get to a decision and try to resolve any things that we think might be inconsistent or difficult, and try to apply it appropriately. And then based on that, we will, again, presumably we are ready today to take a vote. We will in fact take a vote and make a determination. That's my expectation at least. All right, any questions on the procedure? All right, Mr. Booker, you may proceed.
I do have one thing. It occurred to me. I just have one other authority to file, I suppose, as a rebuttal to the statement that Mr. Booker filed late yesterday afternoon. Do you want it now, or do you want to wait till I start our presentation?
Why don't we wait, because I think it'll be better in context with your presentation. All right? Mr. Booker, you may proceed.
Mr. Leone, if you want to swear Mr. Booker in so we can have.
Yes, we just talked about that, yep. Mr. Booker, to the extent that you're going to give testimony, let's go ahead and swear you in.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalties for perjury that the truth you'll give, the statements you'll give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, you may proceed.
Hi, I'm Ted Booker, and I'm running as a Democratic candidate for St. Joseph County Assessor. I filed this legal challenge because Mike Castellan, the Republican candidate for County Assessor, who now serves as Penn Township Assessor, doesn't appear to meet residency standards set by the Indiana Code to be a candidate or hold elected office. My challenge is supported by case law cited by James Masters, Mr. Castellan's attorney, in his motion to dismiss. It is also supported by documents provided to the board by both parties. Records show that in March of last year, Mr. Castellan and his wife, Heather Fite, bought a 4-bedroom, 2,200 square foot home for $329,000 in Port Charlotte, Florida. Records also show the couple leases an apartment at Autumn Lakes Townhomes and Apartments in Mishawaka. Simply put, there's one question the board is here to answer today. Where is Mr. Castellan's permanent residence according to the Indiana Code? Mr. Masters contends Mr. Castellan's permanent residence is his Mishawaka apartment, but I believe evidence shows it's his Florida home. As Mr. Masters noted in the motion to dismiss, this issue centers around what defines a candidate's residence. The motion states that residence means the place where a person has a true, fixed, and permanent home and principal establishment, and to which the person has, whenever absent, the intention of returning. The motion also states that no one factor is dispositive of an individual's domicile, as it is a matter of context. Records from the Charlotte County Appraiser's Office, meanwhile, show Ms. Fight successfully applied for a homestead exemption for the couple's Florida home. The homestead exemption application lists Mr. Castellan and Ms. Fight as owners of the property. And although the application is only signed by Ms. Fight, the form states that under Article 7, Section 6B of the Florida Constitution, married persons are entitled to one homestead exemption as a family unit. A married couple is considered a family unit unless they prove otherwise to the property appraiser. But in this case, no evidence was presented by Ms. Fight or Mr. Castellan to prove they aren't a family unit. As a result, the homestead exemption was received then by Ms. Fight and Mr. Castellan as a family unit, not exclusively by Ms. Fight as a single person, which is what Mr. Masters contends in his motion to dismiss. Ms. Fight also attested to the following statement on the application. I do qualify under Florida statutes. I am a permanent resident of the state of Florida, and I own and occupy the property. The homestead exemption supports the conclusion that Mr. Castellan is a Florida resident pursuant to Indiana Code 3-5-5-11, which is cited in my legal challenge and states, the place where a person's immediate family resides is the person's residence, unless the family's residence is a temporary location for the person's immediate family or for transient purposes, and that's not the case here. And as Florida resident, and Mr. Castellan's Florida residency is also proven by Indiana Code 3-5-5-9, which states, if a person moves to another state with the intention of remaining in the other state for an indefinite time as a place of residence, the person loses residency in Indiana, even if the person intends to return home at some point. Further proof that Mr. Castellan and Ms. Fight are a family unit is demonstrated by the fact that they jointly filed their Indiana and federal tax returns for 2021. The tax returns identify their home address as 906 Frostfield Drive, apartment 3B in Mishawaka, but they were filed after the homestead exemption application had been filed for their Florida residence. In addition, Mr. Castellan's conduct shows his intent is to reside with his wife at his Florida home. To that point, I would call the board's attention to Exhibit A of my legal challenge, which includes emails obtained by a public records request that I submitted. Emails show Mr. Castellan held several Zoom meetings with his staff in 2021, suggesting he may have been in Florida. And the board can allude to these specific emails if you'd like, but one email, which was sent by one of his employees on January 21 of this year, shows Mr. Castellan left for Florida in December. And the board has that email. I can answer any questions later about these emails if you have them. And in another email sent to one of his employees on July 2 of this year, Mr. Castellan stated that his intention was to complete some paperwork and tells the employee, remind me when I get back, suggesting he was in Florida at the time. I'd next like to discuss Exhibit B of my challenge, which includes Facebook photos documenting Mr. Castellan's presence in Florida. The photos are in chronological order, and they confirm that Mr. Castellan was in Florida last year on April 13, April 14, May 9, May 28, June 2, June 15, July 4, July 17, July 27, and October 11. And for this year, the photos show he was in Florida on January 2, March 6, March 13, April 15, April 30, June 19, and June 27. In conclusion, there is nothing about having an apartment in St. Joseph County with a finite lease that proves Mr. Castellan lives here permanently or intends to move back here from Florida. Nor does the vacant lot on South Kentucky Street in South Bend that was transferred in June to Mr. Castellan for $10 by a quitclaim deed. According to an article published July 8 by the South Bend Tribune, when asked what his plans are for that lot, Mr. Castellan said, "I don't know. We just bought the land with the intention of maybe building a house. We haven't really talked about that." Based on the Indiana Code sections I've noted and the documents in the record, I believe Mr. Castellan's own evidence not only supports the conclusion he is a Florida resident, but that he has also given up any Indiana residency and isn't legally qualified to run for county assessor. So I'd like to thank the board for your time and consideration.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of the way of testimony on your own?
Not at this time.
Okay. Mr. Masters, any questions for Mr. Booker?
Mr. Booker, where do you reside?
4417 Irish Hills Drive, apartment 3C, South Bend.
And how long have you resided there?
Since October of last year.
And prior to that, where did you reside?
I resided in Elkhart, Indiana.
So, do I take it from your testimony that you moved into St. Joseph County 1 month before the filing deadline to run for county assessor last year?
I will simply say that I met the residency requirements under the Indiana Code.
So you moved in 1 month before the filing deadline, is that correct?
I'll just say that I met the requirements.
Would you direct the witness to answer
I'm
the
not-
question?
I'm not sure.
Yes or no?
Mr. Masters,
I-
that depends on a determination as to
I-
what
I
the
did-
filing deadline is. My understanding of filing deadline
I-
for candidacy is in January of each
I-
year, January to February.
I believe
I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Did you move in 1 month before the residency requirement to run for county assessor?
I believe the requirement that Mr. Masters is alluding to is that a candidate must live in the county at least a year before the election in question, and I've met that requirement.
By moving in 1 month before the time deadline?
Mr. Masters,
Is that correct?
I think you've made your point, Mr. Masters. We
I
understand.
don't see why.
Where do
that's
you
wrong.
work, sir?
I work for the Elkhart County Assessor's Office in the Appeals Department.
Have you ever been an assessor in St. Joseph County?
I haven't.
Have you ever done any assessing work in St. Joseph County?
I haven't.
You say in your statement that no evidence was presented by Ms. Fight or Mr. Castellan to prove they aren't a family unit. As a result, the homestead exemption was received by Ms. Fight and Mr. Castellan as a family unit, not exclusively by Ms. Fight as a single person. What evidence do you have to support that statement?
This evidence hasn't been entered into the record yet, but I do have an email from the Charlotte County appraiser stating that Ms. Fight, in this instance, applied as a family unit, and that, this represents a family unit, and the homestead exemption went to the family unit. And so I was prepared to use that as rebuttal evidence, but if the board wishes to, I do have copies of that email that I can provide at this time.
If you wish to submit it, please go ahead and do so. Mr. Masters, any objection?
No, not to that.
All right, this, your submission, which is an email dated August 11, 2022, and preceding emails are admitted into the record.
Mr. Booker, when you submitted your candidate challenge, the CN1, you attached to it an email response that you had received from the property appraiser for the property for Port Charlotte, Florida. Isn't that correct? Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes,
And you know that he made you filed apparently a public records request asking for any homestead exemption that had been submitted by Michael Castellan for the property in Port Charlotte, Florida. Isn't that correct?
that's correct.
And what was his response to you?
I don't have that particular email right in front of me.
Well,
but
how
his-
about if I read it
but
to you then? And this,
I can
see if this-
summarize, but, okay.
He submitted to you a response that said there is an application for 2022 for a residency-based exemption on the property in Port Charlotte, Florida. The homestead exemption on the referenced property was granted for the 2022 tax roll to Heather Ann Fight. Michael Wayne Castellan, husband, did not apply.
Yes.
You're aware of that?
I'm not disputing that Michael Castellan did not apply. I am saying, so to answer your question, yes, I am aware of that.
All right, and in support of this claim that because Mr. Castellan's wife, Ms. Fight, submitted the homestead exemption on her own, that makes them the family unit. What investigation did you do into that to support that claim?
So I did call the Charlotte County Appraiser's Office. I spoke with an employee in the exemptions department about this situation, and then I also received the email, which I just gave you, just to clarify, whether she applied as a family unit. It was described how if she wanted to apply as a single person, she would have had to provide evidence proving that they live separately. That wasn't done in this instance. And so, that's not an issue here, so the email, the line in question here with the email I provided says, so she would be representing a family unit. So we have the Charlotte County Appraiser saying that she would be representing a family unit in an email.
Did you inquire into Florida law as to what is a family unit?
I did not look into that.
Did you look at any Florida law to determine what is a family unit under Florida law?
I do know that obviously it comprises the married couple in this instance.
Are you aware under Florida law that it exactly contradicts what you just said, that under Florida law, two married people can each be considered a family unit and have separate homestead exemptions? Are you aware of that, sir?
I am not aware of that. And I do not believe that is the case.
I'm sorry?
And I do not believe that is the case.
Based on what? Based on what?
How is one individual a family unit?
Well, pay attention today and you may learn
Mr.
something
Masters,
about the law.
Mr. Masters, direct your comments to me, please.
Have you done any inquiry at all into whether Mr. Castellan has changed his residence to Florida?
Yes, I have. I believe the evidence I've presented.
Has he changed, have you had any evidence that he's changed his voter registration?
No.
In fact, you know that he submitted on oath a candidacy declaration for the office of county assessor stating what his residence is in Mishawaka, St. Joseph County.
I'm aware of that.
All right. You know that that's a presumption of truth, And what have you done to contradict that? What evidence do you have to show that he is not a resident of Mishawaka, St. Joseph County?
I believe the state statutes that I cited in my statement speak to that.
Do you have
They
any
speak to the
document?
fact that,
Mr. Masters, let the witness finish, please.
I didn't realize
they
he was
speak to the
continuing.
fact that if somebody's spouse lives in another state, there's a statute that says under the eyes of Indiana code, that's also the candidate's residence in this context.
If you read the election code, you're also aware there's a section of the election code that says a person may have a residence separate from the family.
Yes, I'm aware of that. You included that in your motion to dismiss, and so,
All right, have you any evidence that Mr. Castellan has changed where his driver's license is issued?
I don't.
Or where he files his taxes?
I don't.
Or where his car is registered?
I don't.
Or where he maintains bank accounts?
I don't.
Or where he has his property insured?
I do not.
So you have nothing to indicate, no evidence other than reliance on this homestead exemption to support your claim that Mr. Castellan changed his residence.
Nope, that's not true. As part of my statement, as you'll recall, I did allude to Mr. Castellan's conduct. And that's part of what proves residency based on
And
what you
what
actually provided in your motion to dismiss.
What
Dismiss,
conduct?
you actually look at the conduct of the person.
What specific conduct are you referring to?
I'm referring to numerous photos of him being in Florida.
Did you look at the dates of those photographs?
I did.
You realize that of the photographs you submitted, most of them are either on Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July weekend, New Year's weekend, or while he was on vacation in Florida?
I believe there are numerous dates, and not all of them are tied to holidays and don't appear to be all tied to vacations. I would like to hear what Mr. Castellan would have to say about that.
So you don't know then whether he was on vacation or on a federal holiday
I'm
when
bringing-
he was in Florida?
I'm bringing this evidence before the board, and I hope questions will be asked of Mr. Castellan in terms of how much time he does spend down there.
And you submitted some emails that referenced having Zoom meetings. Did you look at those emails to see the actual days of the week those Zoom meetings were to be scheduled?
No, which is why I wasn't presuming anything. I
So is
said
it-
he may have been in Florida at those times. I'm just raising the issue, and there's an opportunity then for questioning and follow-up. If the board wishes to ask Mr. Castellan about the Zoom meetings or about the photos, they have that ability here today, but I'm just bringing evidence before the board.
You realize that some of those requested Zoom meetings were during the time of the COVID pandemic when the office was closed?
Yes, and which is why I'm not presuming anything. I'm just bringing evidence before the board and allowing for an opportunity for questioning.
And are you also aware that some of those requests for Zoom meetings were during times when Mr. Castellan was on vacation and he was still doing business for the taxpayers of Penn Township while he was on vacation?
No, I have no way of being aware of what Mr.
Well,
Castellan.
you could be aware if you looked at the dates of when those Zoom meetings were to be held, and you could see that they were on either a Friday or a Monday when he was on vacation, and he was still doing public business.
Mr. Masters, you'll have an opportunity to comment on the evidence later. Let's
Okay.
limit your
I-
comments to questions of
I
Mr.
would
Booker.
have an additional comment to make since this is being raised as an issue.
Well, can I
If we-
finish
if we-
my cross-examination?
You may. Let him finish first, Mr. Booker, and then you'll have a chance to add anything additional.
You make note in your statement here about Mr. Castellan owning a piece of real estate in South Bend. Mr. Booker, do you own any real estate in St. Joseph County, Indiana?
Not presently.
I'll pass the witness.
right, board members, do you have any specific questions for Mr. Booker? Ben?
Mr. Booker, could you just repeat when you moved into St. Joe County, what the timeline was for leasing your apartment?
I don't have the specific date. I believe it was at the beginning of October
Of what year?
last year.
2021. So do you believe you meet the statutory requirement that you cite, that you
Yes.
yourself meet the qualification?
Yes,
Okay. You also cited a federal tax return that Mr. Castellan filed, that he filed jointly with his wife, a federal tax return after the Florida exemption that he claimed. How does that support your argument?
I am supporting the fact that they're acting as a family unit and acting jointly as a family unit. And the timing is, I believe, relevant in this case because, I mean, a homestead exemption was applied for. It was received. And so, you know, we have Mr. Castellan's wife declaring that as her primary residence. Then later, tax returns were jointly filed by the couple, and they're listing the Mishawaka address. It just seems like a question there. Why wasn't the Florida address listed?
So he listed his Indiana address on the tax return?
That's correct.
Are you aware that Mr. Castellan's held public office here in St. Joe County for a number of years?
I am.
Do you believe that he is not qualified to hold that office?
As it pertains to this issue, I believe he's not qualified. I don't believe he meets residency requirements. And that's specifically what I'm focused on here today.
Okay.
Obviously, Mr. Castellan, I respect him as an individual, and I think he's obviously he's qualified as an assessor, but that's not the issue here at hand today.
Do you yourself have any plans to purchase or own real property in St. Joe County?
I do.
And what are those plans?
I am actively doing research right now. I can't give you anything specific right now, but I do plan to purchase property to meet that requirement in the near term.
In Mr. Masters' motion to dismiss, he says the presumption of a person's residency can be overcome with certain evidence. How do you believe, or what do you believe would be sufficient to overcome that presumption?
I do not, I can just simply say that I do not believe that he has overcome the presumption. In this instance, I believe that the facts speak for themselves in terms of what would be sufficient to overcome it. I'm not in a position to answer that question myself, but I believe that the facts and evidence, it speaks for itself in this case.
Thank you, Ms. Berger.
Rita, do you have any questions for Mr. Booker?
No.
Actually, I do have one other. You mentioned that the case law cited by Mr. Masters actually supports your position. Could you just give at least one example of how the case law he cites supports your position?
I believe the definition of residence in this case supports my position. So he defines residence in his motion. He also alludes to various statutes, and I believe that the statutes that are alluded to actually support my position. And I don't think there's anything in there that does not support my position, other than that there are obviously we're at odds over the homestead exemption situation, where he appears to be contending that Ms. Fite applied for that exclusively and is receiving that benefit exclusively, even though we have the appraiser on the record saying that it was received as a family unit. So other than that, I think there's nothing in his motion that doesn't really support my position in terms of the statutes that are cited and so forth.
You mentioned that you yourself have plans to purchase or own real property in St. Joe County. Would you say that you have an intent to do that?
I would.
Okay, no further questions?
And Mr. Booker, I do not have any specific questions. Is there anything you would like to add then at the end?
Not at this time.
Thank you.
May I redirect or recross?
You may, based solely on matters that Ben brought up.
Yes, I'd like to direct your attention to the tax returns that you were asked about. Mr. Booker, you're referring to the 2021 tax returns, Exhibits 7 and 8 that were filed by Mr. Castellan as exhibits in this case?
Yes,
All right, have you looked at those?
I have.
You're aware that those are for the year 2021?
I am.
All right, and in your candidate challenge at CN1, you attached to it the application that had been filed by Ms. Fite for tax exemption on the property in Florida.
I did not. I did not. That was not provided by me. I requested the application from the Charlotte County Appraiser's Office. They did not give me that because they told me it wasn't disclosable under the Public Records Act. So the application must have been provided by Mr. Masters.
I didn't have it. I got it from the documents that you submitted to the, well, maybe it's the email you sent to Mr. Leone some time ago. But,
I'm 100% sure I didn't receive that.
well, I didn't make it up, and I have it attached in any event to our motion to dismiss. Did you have a chance to look at what was filed as part of our motion to dismiss?
I did.
Did you see that application form there?
I did.
Did you notice what the date is on that application form?
I don't have it right in front of me.
Well, let
but
me
I
help
will.
you out. It's December 30th of 2021.
Okay.
You're aware that that homestead application and the exemption is granted for the year 2022.
I am.
All right, so the tax returns were filed by Mr. Castellan and Heather Fite as a married couple in St. Joseph County, Indiana for the year 2021. And the homestead exemption doesn't apply in Florida until the year 2022. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, that's all.
I would just add that, not to get into the weeds with this, but when you're filing tax returns, you're also saying, okay, what's my home address now? What's my address now? The returns were filed in 2022 and said, we have them still listing the Indiana address as their home address on the returns, even though at the tail end of 21, they applied for the homestead exemption. So I'm just saying that the address, the active address listed, I'm not talking about the address used for the 2021 tax year. That was the point that I was making.
I would like to point out that Mr. Booker is absolutely wrong in that regard. When you file a 2021 tax return, you're declaring where your residence was in 2021.
Mr. Masters, that's a matter for argument, please. So we'll take that up as we get there. Mr. Booker, anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Mr. Masters.
You want me to go up there?
If you're going to, if you're going to if you're going to go ahead and give some sort of an introductory matter, then yes. Yes, you may.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Castellan a few questions when I'm done with my preliminary comments, but I'd like to respond, I guess, in argument to some of the statements that Mr. Booker made in his written statement. His argument is wrong both on the facts and he's wrong on the law. The fact that Mr. Castellan's wife, Heather Fite, claimed their house in Florida to be her permanent residence and that she applied for and received a homestead exemption does not make that property Mr. Castellan's permanent residence. Mr. Castellan is a lifelong resident of St. Joseph County, and he did nothing to change his place of residence. He lives in Mishawaka in an apartment now. They've sold their homes. He's registered to vote from his residence in Mishawaka. He votes from that residence. He filed declaration of candidacy both for Penn Township Assessor in the primary and a declaration of candidacy for the office of Assessor of St. Joseph County, on oath declaring his residence in Mishawaka to be his place of residence. By statute, which we cite in our motion to dismiss, that creates a presumption that it is his place of residence, and that presumption is Mr. Booker's burden to overcome. Mr. Castellan's driver's license is registered at his home address in Mishawaka. His car is registered at his home address in Mishawaka. His bank accounts are, information is sent to his home address in Mishawaka. His insurance is for his home in Mishawaka and his property in Mishawaka. On their 2021 tax return, he claimed St. Joseph County, state of Indiana, to be his place of residence. All of those are in our exhibits, which we have submitted to you. Now, Mr. Booker came up with the argument yesterday afternoon that he submitted to us that because Mr. Castellan's wife, Heather Fite, filed the application for the homestead exemption, that makes him a, quote, family unit, close quote, under Florida law. And he goes on to argue that because of that, the homestead exemption is for the both of them. Well, he's wrong as a matter of Florida law. Florida law recognizes that a husband and wife may have separate permanent residences, and each of them is entitled to a separate homestead exemption. What I passed out to you is a section of the Florida Administrative Code from the Department of Revenue. The most important section for what we're discussing is paragraph 7. A married woman and her husband may establish separate permanent residences without showing impelling reasons or just grounds for doing so. If it is determined by the property appraiser that separate permanent residences and separate family units have been established by the husband and wife, and they are otherwise qualified, each may be granted a homestead exemption. Florida law recognizes that each spouse may be a family unit, as that term is used under the Florida Constitution, eligible for a homestead exemption. Now, if you look at paragraph 1, Florida law is just like Indiana law. You're not entitled to a homestead exemption unless that's your permanent residence. Ms. Fite declared the property in Florida to be her permanent residence. Mr. Castellan did not. And the email that was submitted with the candidate 1 from the property appraiser in Florida confirmed that Mr. Castellan did not apply for a homestead exemption. The homestead exemption was issued only to Ms. Fite. And as I cited in our motion, under Florida law, when one spouse only applies for a homestead exemption on entirety's property, that is property owned by a husband and wife, then you only get half the homestead exemption, which is the case here. So there is absolutely no legal validity to Mr. Booker's argument that under Florida law, because Ms. Fight filed for a homestead exemption, that somehow or other that makes it Mr. Castellan's homestead exemption too. Now, Mr. Booker also makes the argument that under Indiana law, Mr. Castellan's residence is where his family resides. Well, he's wrong on the law in that respect too. Indiana law creates a presumption, certain presumptions as to where a place of residence is, and then that has to be backed up by proof. There's also a presumption that a person can maintain a separate place of residence. And how do you establish where your residence is? It's a combination of intent coupled with conduct to evidence that is your intent. Well, the intent of where Mr. Castellan's residence is found here in all these documents we submitted to you as our exhibits. His voter registration, his voting card, his voting history, his declaration of candidacies, his motor vehicle registration, his driver's license, his tax returns, his bank accounts, his insurance, all is in St. Joseph County, Indiana, all registered to his home address in Mishawaka. That establishes the intent. That's the conduct that proves his intent. Mr. Castellan has done nothing to change his place of residence, where he votes, where he has his car registered, where he does his banking, where he has his insurance. I find it curious that Mr. Booker would cite the case that we referred to in our motion to dismiss, the Alsop versus Swalls-Thompson, the case out of Vigo County, which challenged the residency of the Vigo County, I believe it was auditor, because that lady had filed for a homestead exemption in Florida. And the Court of Appeals said, notwithstanding the fact that she had a homestead exemption in Florida, she still maintained an Indiana residency and was eligible not only to run for the office, but to hold the office. So why Mr. Castellan would think that case supports his position, I can't understand. I'm going to ask Mr. Castellan a few questions. But something I want you to understand. Mr. Castellan is a disabled veteran of the U.S. Navy. As such, under Florida law, if he were to file for a homestead exemption, he would be entitled to 100% exemption from real estate taxes. He has not done that because his residency is here, because his job is here serving the taxpayers of Penn Township and hopefully soon to be serving the taxpayers of St. Joseph County. He is a St. Joseph County resident, and he has done nothing to change that. The Zoom meetings that were referred to, I already alluded to it in my questioning, but those Zoom meetings all correspond with times that he was either on vacation or out of the office because of the pandemic. The photographs that they submitted to you from the Facebook, I guess. If you look at the dates, Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July weekend, New Year's weekend, or dates when Mr. Castellan was on vacation. Nothing has changed in terms of Mr. Castellan's residency. He is fully eligible to be the next assessor in St. Joseph County. If you don't mind, from here, I'll ask him a few questions.
I'd rather have Mr. Castellan at the podium because we'll be able to pick him up on
All
video
right.
and then have you over here.
We'll switch seats then. How's that?
That would be great.
We'll switch places. Thank you.
Mr. Castellan, let's go ahead and swear you in for this. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalties for perjury that the statements you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? Okay. Witness answers affirmatively. Mr. Masters, please
Thank you.
proceed.
Mr. Castellan, where do you reside?
906 Frostfield Drive, apartment 3B.
And where is that? What town, city?
It's in Mishawaka, Indiana.
St. Joseph County?
Yes.
How long have you lived there?
Since April of 2021.
And prior to that, where did you live?
3802 Fern Hill Drive. Mishawaka, Indiana,
How long did you live there?
3 years.
And did you live somewhere else in St. Joseph County prior to that?
I did. I lived at 1504 Lynn Street, Mishawaka, Indiana, for approximately 5 years.
Okay, and were you a resident of St. Joseph County at any time prior to that?
Yes, I was.
And for how long?
My entire life, except for the time period for which I joined the United States military and retired and came home.
Do you have a house in Florida?
Yes, I do.
You own that with your wife,
I do.
as husband and wife?
Yes.
Did you file an application for a homestead exemption on that property?
I did not.
Do you receive a homestead exemption on that property?
I do not.
You mentioned you served in the military. Which branch?
United States Navy,
How long were you in the Navy?
20 years.
And were you discharged honorably?
Yes, I was.
And were you disabled as a result of your service?
Yes,
What is the extent of your disability?
100%.
Are you aware that in Florida, as a disabled United States military veteran, that you are entitled to a certain tax exemption?
I am aware of that.
And do you know how much that tax exemption is?
Yeah, it's 100% tax exempt.
And we're talking about taxes on the real estate.
That's correct.
So if you were to file for an exemption on your real estate, you'd have 100% exemption from having to pay taxes in Florida?
That is correct.
Have you done that?
I did not.
Are you aware that in the state of Florida, residents of Florida do not pay and file state tax returns?
I am.
Have you filed a state tax return in the state of Florida?
I have not.
Have you declared yourself to be a resident of the state of Florida?
I have not.
Just in case it isn't clear, have you been a resident of St. Joseph County since and prior to November 8th of 2021,
Yes.
meaning a year before this coming general election?
Yes, I.
I believe that's all I have.
Mr. Booker, you're entitled to ask questions. If you'd come back up here to the microphone, please, that would be helpful.
Oh, sit back now.
No, you can stay, though, you can stay there, because he'll be asking you questions. Mr. Booker's going to come up here to the front, and it'd be best if you stayed there as a witness.
So, I guess for starters, I have some questions for Mr. Masters. Or-
Mr. Masters is not a witness, so he.
Okay.
You can certainly make argument when the appropriate time comes, but for
Okay,
right
so
now, directly to
this
Mr.
is just my
Castellan.
opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Castellan.
That is correct.
Okay. I would then allude back to the statement that I made, and I would allude to the dates in which Mr. Castellan was in Florida per the Facebook photos that I submitted. Can Mr. Castellan, and I would actually like to get that document if I could.
Certainly.
So with regard to your time spent in Florida, sir, the photos that I submitted show that you were there last year in April, May, June, July, October, and this year in January, March, April, June, and multiple dates in several of those months. So can you describe to the board how long you were down there during the months in question? Because with multiple dates, it does appear, at least to me, that you were down there for long stretches of time during the months in question.
So I wasn't aware that I wasn't allowed to take vacation, but with that said, often I would leave maybe on a Thursday, come back on a Sunday.
Okay. So for example, you were there on May 9, then you were there on May 28. Were you there for basically the whole month of May, or you're there for typically a week, or how does that work?
So I would say that those Facebook pictures aren't always reflective of the date. Sometimes those pictures are posted at a later date, which if you follow Facebook would show that, that would be reflective of the date when you was there, not exactly the date for which it was posted. With that said, again, I did not spend entire months in Florida. I took vacation, and of the days that I was on vacation, I often worked remotely as I needed to make sure that the taxpayers were being attended to.
Do you think it's normal to be taking vacation to Florida then, in terms of how you characterize it? You would be taking vacation then, you were there in April, May, June, July, October, and then this year, January, March, April, June. So you're characterizing all of that as vacation time and not time at your Florida home with your family who lives there.
I think I would say that what I do on my weekends is irrelevant.
That's all I have at this time.
May I redirect?
Let the board ask questions first, then you may have additional things to redirect with. Questions, Ben?
Mr. Castellan?
Of Mr. Castellan, yes.
Mr. Castellan, could you describe your duties as township assessor?
Yeah, my duties is to ensure that the taxpayers receive fair and equitable assessment, and we do that by making sure that we send out the assessments on a timely manner. We work in tandem with the county assessor and make sure that all of the sales information and the multitude of different facets of the assessment process is reported in a timely manner. I'm also responsible for making sure that the taxpayers are heard through the appeal process, for which I meet with each and every taxpayer every year. I do that myself, not my staff.
Are you able to fulfill those duties remotely?
I'm able to do some of those duties remotely. Meeting the taxpayer requires me to be in office with them.
Do you have any future plans to be a resident of Florida?
I do not.
Do you have any future plans to change your license, change your voting registration, change license or voting registration to the state of Florida?
I do not, unless I'm lucky enough to retire someday.
No further questions.
I do have one follow-up question, if I may.
Well,
Okay.
just wait till we go around,
Okay.
everybody has a chance. Rita, questions for Mr. Castellan?
I have none, thank you.
Mr. Castellan, I have a few questions. I'd like to get a little bit better sense as to how much time you actually spent in Florida and how that relates to your overall time and how much vacation time. Is there a specific amount of time that elected officials have for vacation?
There is no statute that says that an elected official is limited to the time of vacation time.
So there's nothing that says 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, anything like that?
The only thing that I'm aware of in the year of 2021 was that all elected officials need to spend a minimum of 1 day in office. But I would argue that if you're not in office, you're not doing your job with the taxpayer.
And where does that 1 day expectation come from? Do you
I do not. I'm not familiar with that.
you don't know if it was state or a local expectation?
Well, it's assumed
one
that
day
it's
a
a state.
week.
It's
Sorry?
assumed it's an expectation from the state.
So let's take calendar year 2021. I know that there are a number of Facebook photos. I know that they aren't necessarily posted on the date that the photo is taken. Can you estimate for the year 2021, how many weeks you would have been down in Florida?
Not off the top of the head, because I didn't take often full weeks. I would take, like I said before, on a Thursday to a Monday, or sometimes I would do Tuesday to Thursday. It just depended on whether or not, what my schedule was with the taxpayers.
So are we looking at 4 weeks, 8 weeks? I mean, what's your best sense of that?
I'd have to go back and look at the records. I couldn't tell you the exact time.
Are there specific duties, other than, of course, your interaction with taxpayers, are there specific duties that you have here that require your physical presence?
Yes, so anytime that we have to talk about budgets, I have to be here. Anytime that the county assessor requires me a personal meeting, I have to be here. Typically, that's one time a month. And then any other situation that would be required by local government.
Okay, and did those meetings take place regularly during 2021?
They did.
And you did attend those in person?
I did all but maybe one or two where I sent my staff members for training purposes.
It looks like February of 2022, you and your wife filed a joint federal tax return and a joint Indiana state tax return, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in both of those, well, first of all, the copies we have are not signed, and there's no mark on it that indicates that it was filed. I presume that these, in fact, are the true and correct copies that were filed respectively with the IRS and with the Indiana Department of Revenue?
That's correct. Those are the copies that came from my CPA.
In the tax returns, you do mention a daughter who is a dependent, and she is listed as a claim for a credit as a dependent. How old is that dependent?
She's above 18 now.
Was she at the time the return was filed?
She would have turned 18 in November of last year.
And is she in school at this point?
She graduated. She
from-
graduated from Penn
high
High School last
school.
year, yeah.
On the Indiana tax return, there is an indication, the return is set up so that you have to indicate the county in which you lived and the county in which you worked, and that is 71, which is St. Joseph County. Also the county where your spouse lived and the county where your spouse worked, and that is also 71, which is St. Joseph County. How do you square that with the claim that your wife made with respect to being a full-time resident of the state of Florida?
I don't understand the question. I mean,
Okay, so there's in order to, and I don't want to get into Indiana tax law, there just seems to be some kind of an inconsistency between claiming an Indiana income tax return, residency and working, and the application that was made in Florida. Do you see any contradiction there?
well, I'm not a lawyer, but I would assume that if you spent more than 183 days in the state of Indiana under tax code, you would have to file in the state of Indiana.
Okay. I believe there's a partial year resident form that can be filed. Again, I'm not a tax lawyer either, so I don't know the answer to that question, but
Mr. Leone, you're going to get this witness all confused because he doesn't really, as he said, he's not going to tell you what Indiana tax law is, but it's simple enough. This is a tax return for the year 2021. And if you look at the application for the homestead exemption that's attached to our motion to dismiss, It's not filed, it's not signed till December 30th of 2021 for the year 2022. So Heather Fight would have been a full-time resident of the state of Indiana for 2021 when she filed this tax return. It's not the date you signed the tax return, it's the year that you're filing it for.
Right. All right. So on December 30th, though, Ms. Fight indicated, as I see the application, she signs under penalties for perjury, I believe, that I am a permanent resident of the state of Florida, and I own and occupy the property above. That's dated December 30th. And so you're saying that she became a resident on that date?
That's right. You have to file it before January 1, by the way. Just
Right.
like here in
No,
Indiana.
I understand that. And I understand it's for 2022, but it talks about status
Well, that's
as
a
of the
matter
date,
of
as of the date
intention
of
like
signing.
anything else. You declare that you're a
It's not,
permanent
no, it's not a
resident.
matter of intention, it's a statement of fact.
No, it's not, there's no requirement in that state or this state that you have to have lived there for a certain period of time before you say you're a permanent resident. If you say, I'm a permanent resident of the state of Florida, I'm entitled to a homestead exemption, you file the application.
Okay, so you're saying that on December 30th, that was the date that she declared herself to be a permanent resident of
Correct.
Florida?
That would be the proper interpretation.
I don't have any other questions. Do you have any redirect?
Yeah, I do. I have a little logistic issue here. I have to ask Mr. Castellano a few questions about those Facebook photographs, I guess.
If you want to both speak from that mic, that's okay, or?
No,
unless-
that's all right. I'll sit over here. Mr. Castellano, you recall we went through this list of photographs, I guess, or whatever they're called, screenshots from Facebook in my office?
I do, yes.
And you were able to get your calendar out when we did that and compare those dates and tell us where you were and what you were doing that time. Well, let's see if we can go through this. There's a photograph there from April 13th of 2021. Can you tell the election board what you were doing in Florida at that time?
So April 13th or 14th, I would have took that week of vacation, I believe.
Okay, so that you were on vacation that week.
Yes.
The next item, or the next picture, I think, is May 9th of 2021. You probably don't have anything there to make a reference, but you recall when we looked at that before, that you determined that that date is a Sunday.
That's correct.
What were you doing there at that time?
So we were renovating the property, so I was overseeing some renovations.
When you go to the place in Florida, do you fly?
I fly, yes.
And what airport do you fly out
I
of?
fly out of South Bend, Indiana.
And what airline do you take?
I use Allegiant.
Okay, and Allegiant has a limited schedule of to and from, doesn't it?
It does, depending on the time of year.
Okay, mostly it flies out of on Thursdays?
Yeah, Tuesday, Thursdays, and Sundays.
Okay, and then a return flight is back to South Bend on what days?
So it'd be the same days. So you'd
Okay.
have Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday.
All right, so if you were going down there, most of the time you would leave on a Thursday?
Yes.
And when would you return?
Either a Sunday or Tuesday, depending on availability of the bookings.
So on this photograph for May 9th, which is a Sunday, would you have been there for like Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Yes.
Now, the next photograph is May 28th. We determined that that was a Thursday.
That's correct.
Did that date also correspond with a federal holiday?
I believe it did.
What is that?
Is that Memorial Day or what?
You were off? County offices were closed?
I'd have to look at the calendar, but there might have been a day off.
Your office was
Okay.
closed, I guess.
Okay.
There's another photograph there from June 2nd. Were you there for an extended period of time?
I would have been there for, over the holiday, for sure.
Sure. So June 2nd was a Wednesday. You recall when you returned?
It would have been probably that Thursday.
Next day?
Yep.
The next photograph is June 15th. Remember what day of that week we determined that to be?
So
Tues-
without the frame of reference, I can't remember exactly what day.
All right,
but
if I told
most
you
of
that,
these would
if
be
I
over
told
the
you that
holiday.
was a Tuesday, would that help you recall when you had gone there and when you came back?
Yes.
When did you go down?
So if I was there on a Tuesday, I would have flew out probably that weekend.
The prior weekend.
Yes.
All right, the next photograph is July 4? Is that the next one in your list?
Yeah, my favorite holiday.
Yeah, July 4. Would you have been there then over the 4th of July weekend?
Well, yeah, if you look at the picture, you see I'm flying the United States Navy flag, just for a point of reference.
All right, now there's another photograph on July 17th. Were you there the entire time from July 4th to July 17th, or did you come back?
I don't believe I was. I'd have to look at my records, but I did not spend entire months in Florida.
All right, is that another one of those Thursday through Sunday trips?
Again, I'd have to look at the records, but I'd say yes.
Okay, and the next photograph is July 27th, which, when we looked at this before, you told me that was a Tuesday. So does that help you recollect how
That-
much time you had been there when that picture was taken?
Yeah, that could have been a week vacation or over the weekend. Again, I would have to look at the records.
All right, the next photograph is October 11th. I know you don't recall, but I have the notes here. When we discussed this, you determined that October 11th is a Monday. Does that help you determine when you would have come back from Florida?
Yeah, it would have been either that Thursday or the Sunday of that week.
All right, the next picture there is January 2nd of 2022. Was that a holiday?
Well, yeah, it's just a new year.
Do you know how long you were there?
I think we came back right after the holiday.
January 4th, perhaps?
Yeah, if that was a Tuesday. Or it may have been the Thursday. Again, I'd have to look at I didn't keep my flight records.
All right, then you have two photographs there, March 6th and March 13th, both days being a Sunday. Can you tell the board what you were doing there then?
Yeah, I would have took a vacation there. We were having some renovations done. We were looking at getting the roof redone, so I would have been there for an extended vacation on that.
Okay, and then the next picture is April 15th, which you determined when you looked at your calendar in my office that that was a Friday. What were you doing there then?
So again, we're still renovating the property. So, it would have went over the weekend, probably on a Thursday, come back on a Sunday, or maybe that following Tuesday.
And that April 15th, I just happened to look, but, in that list of Zoom, or reference, I guess, emails concerning Zoom meetings, one of those references is to have a Zoom meeting on April 15th. So would I take it, is it correct to tell this board that when you were there on April 15th, you were still conducting a Zoom meeting for work at your office in Mishawaka?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we made sure that was that I was always in contact and available to the staff when I was either out for meetings or out on vacation.
There's another photograph there from April 30th. Were you there for an extended period of time between the 15th and the 30th, or did you go and come back?
I believe I came and come back. Again, I had to look at the records.
Okay, well, the 30th is a Saturday. Typically, if you were there on a Saturday, when did you leave to go down?
So it would either have been a Tuesday, the flights are, you have it depends on the time of year. So the flights open up, but most of the flights are Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. So it would have been either one of those days that I could have flew out.
Okay, and June 19th, there's a picture. And that day you determined to be a Sunday. What were you doing there then?
So I don't recall this date. I do know that I was here on, when I announced, which was on the 20th, I believe.
So is it possible you came back that Sunday?
It's possible, or it could be possible we posted this picture at a later date.
And I believe the last photograph there is dated June 27th. You weren't there between the 19th and the 27th continuously, were you?
No.
The
I
27th.
was here because I announced my candidacy downstairs.
On the 20th?
It's either the 20th or the 22nd. I can't remember the date we announced. I think if you
And
look
on,
at the candidacy
on the
announcement,
27th, we determined that to be a Monday, so when would you have flown back?
it would have been either that Thursday,
Or Tuesday?
right.
So in a course, do these photographs here, do they sort of give a fair depiction of the amount of time you spent in Florida between April of 2021 and June of, or the end of June of 2022?
I would say that most of these pictures are relevant to me being down there.
Okay, is it, so how much time do you spend in Florida altogether?
Well, I spend the majority of my time here. So it was, if you were to look at the year, it wouldn't be very much at all.
And 2021 was out of the ordinary because that's when you were acquiring the house, wasn't it?
That's correct. We didn't acquire that till March 31st.
All right, and because of you were acquiring it, did you have to go down there to do certain work to it?
I did. So not only did we have to go down and inspect it and go through that process, but there was quite a few renovations that needed to be done to the property over the year. And we just finished up the roof recently.
As far as you're concerned, what is that house for you? What's your interest in owning the house?
So me and my wife, and even before me and my wife were married, Florida is the place that we vacation. And so we bought it as a vacation home. And maybe one day, like I said before, if I'm lucky enough to retire, we'll retire down there.
If that's your vacation home?
It is.
Any intention at the present time to make that your permanent residence?
No.
Have you done anything? Strike that. That's all. Thank you.
And Mr. Booker, any questions?
Well, since we're talking about the Florida home, does your wife spend most of her time there then?
So my wife was there for a while. She's come back. She has a remote job, so she can go back and forth.
Okay. And then going over these emails, I'd like to go back to the email from January 2nd. Or, I'm sorry, the Facebook photo from January 2nd. Sorry, misspoke there.
January 2nd, what year are we talking about?
We're talking this year. So, and then I'd also like to look at the email that I provided from one of your employees. And that email is dated January 21. And I don't know.
I recall the email. That email.
Okay,
That
all right,
email
all right.
was.
So in this email, it's Kim, one of your employees. It's January 21. She states, "I'm sure you will confirm with Michael. He will approve it as he approved it with me before leaving to Florida in December." And I believe it's in the context of a timesheet. So can you clarify, obviously you were there in early January. So how long were you down in Florida during that period? Because it doesn't appear you were there on January 22nd or 21st, and she's saying that you had left in December, so when you were asked about the January 2nd photo, you said you weren't sure how long you were down there, but you didn't think it was long. And yet
So-
you have,
So that assumption's incorrect. That email from one employee to another was about a discrepancy of comp time that I had granted. And rather than bring that comp time to me, they bickered about it over a period of time. And then email was sent out after the date, and it is irrelevant to when I was in Florida.
were you there on January 21st when the email was sent?
I'd have to look at my calendar. I don't have my calendar with me, so there's no way for me to. So, again, I don't have the calendar in front of me, but I would assume I may have been there on that day. I don't have the calendar to confirm that.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
All right, any follow-up questions from board members?
Not for me.
No,
Any
thank you.
questions? Mr. Castellan, when I first asked you questions, we were trying to determine the number of days, the number of weeks that you were down there, and I couldn't get a specific answer for you because you didn't do that. But the only comment you made in response to one of Mr. Masters' questions is that you were here a majority of the time, so more than 50% of the time. Is that the best estimate that you can give in terms of the amount of time you spent there as compared to the amount of time you spent
Oh,
here?
I
Or
was-
can you do better? Can you give me something better than that?
If you want me to give you exact days,
No, I want your best guess in terms of your.
Well, so I never kept track, I never thought that I would have to keep track of my time because, you know, my concern was the office. And so I spent most of my time in Indiana. And that is not a guesstimate, that's a fact. I spent most of my time in Indiana. If you want exact dates, I'd have to go through my record, but again, the records were shown for public hearings, hearings with the PETA-BOA board, along with taxpayer meetings throughout the year. The fact that I played in golf leagues here locally and bowling leagues throughout the year, I'm sure we can come up with those timeframes for you. But the answer would be I was here most of the year.
And most of the year, meaning more than half of the year.
Absolutely more than half.
I don't have anything further at this point.
Witness excused. Can return to his seat.
Witness is excused. Mr. Masters, any other evidentiary material you wish to present or witnesses?
No,
Okay. And you rest at that point?
yes.
All right, we're finished with the evidentiary portion of the case. Why don't we go ahead and take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll go ahead and reconvene, and we'll discuss the case. Thank you.
All I can do to get through this.
Well, you're not allowed to have your own life.
Indiana State Police Service send me a copy of the
Could be worse than an FBI agent.
I haven't seen yet, informed receipt or nothing yet. The law that said that he shall.
All right, let's go ahead and reconvene the meeting. Is the recording on?
Penny, is it recording?
Is the recording turned on? Great. Okay. Yeah, and Mr. Booker, you're welcome to sit back up here at the table if you wish. Before we get into our deliberations, I'd ask our attorney, Mike Mish, to comment on the process, the burden of proof, and issues of presumption. Could you do that, please?
Yes, so Indiana law specifically states that since Mr. Castellan signed under oath that he is a resident, there is a presumption that has to be overcome by Mr. Booker. And the board now has to weigh out whether Mr. Booker has overcome that presumption that Mr. Castellan does not actually live in the state of Indiana. So that's what this deliberation will be, and weighing out the evidence to see if Mr. Booker has met his burden of proof here.
Could I ask, according to Indiana law, is there any requirement for spending a certain amount of time in a jurisdiction?
That's an elected official, I'm sure he means.
So, as I think Mr. Leone alluded to earlier, there is a multi-factor test when it comes to domicile. I don't think days is necessarily the factor, it's a factor. And so it's something that you guys are going to have to take into consideration, all of the evidence that's been presented thus far, but number of days is not dispositive.
Does that differ from an elected official?
You
For
mean
an elected official, the days?
the elected officials who don't have to come to work?
Yeah. Me, I'm there every day, okay?
No, I know, I'm saying, what are you referencing?
Just for the factor where you're saying how many days does he have to work, it's not the same category as a employee with an elected official.
Right, so it's, when we're looking at domicile or where Mr. Castellan resides,
Okay.
It's not the same type of
Okay.
analysis, yeah.
All right, thank you. The board will need to consider, of course, what we have in front of us, which is the documents that have been submitted by the parties. And I'd like to thank both parties for providing a good documentary base for what we need to take a look at. And also consider the actions and behavior of the parties and see what that tells us with respect to residency. There are a number of factors. Ultimately, what we're trying to determine is what is the intent of Mr. Castellan with respect to his residency. Is it his intent to stay a resident of the state of Indiana at the relevant time, or is it his intent to become a resident of elsewhere, in this case, the state of Florida? So what we'll do is look at the statements and the testimony, and part of what we have to do is to weigh the evidence. We have to look at issues of consistency. We have to look at issues of how the evidence compares, where there is some things that don't line up entirely, and then try to make a decision based on that. What I'd like to do is ask the three, before we take a vote, ask the three, all three of us to make some comments on kind of how we see the evidence and how we would interpret it before we would actually make the vote on that. So Ben, let me start with you. Why don't you go ahead first?
Well, I think you framed it correctly that Mr. Booker does have the burden of proof in this. I think the law is clear that it's a two-pronged analysis, intent plus conduct. I think that there are a number of things that Mr. Castellan has done to show that he intends to remain here in Indiana and that he considers himself a resident of the county. I think by Mr. Booker's own standard, if we're looking at the statute that he cites, I'm not sure that he would even qualify. The requirement is to own real estate here in St. Joe County. Mr. Booker stated that he plans to purchase real estate, which I asked, is that an intent to do so? And he said yes. I think that Mr. Castellan has been an elected official for some time in Penn Township. I think he's fulfilled his duties. He's serving the taxpayers well, it sounds like. And it should also be noted that Mr. Booker is Mr. Castellan, or would be Mr. Castellan's opponent in the November election. I stated earlier in this process that for any candidate, Democrat or Republican, I think having this hang over your head, this question of your candidacy, is really a lot, and I think that a swift resolution of that should be done as quickly as we can. So that's my interpretation of the evidence.
Great, thank you. Rita?
Myself not being legal, it would be inappropriate for me to make any type of comment on anything that pertains to the law in general. I know to stay in my own lane. So the acceptance of any candidacy requirements are given to us in the form that's presented by the state. We accept those, and anybody that goes and tries to appeal the candidacy that might have been, the burden of proof is on them. We just accept any and all filings that are made, and pretty much I'll end with that for right now.
Thank you. My perception here, my reading of this, is that there's clearly evidence on both sides. There's clearly evidence that Mr. Castellan has spent a substantial amount of time in Florida, something less than half a year. Couldn't quite get a good feel of that. But that it is the type of job that in part can be done remotely, in part has to be done should be done in person and is more effectively done in person. But of course, that is somewhat within the discretion of the elected official. There are no rules as it relates to vacation time or time away from the office for an elected official. And of course, during the time of COVID, things are very different. A lot more has been done remotely for safety reasons. I am a little concerned about some of the statutory provisions as they relate to residency. There is an entire chapter in the election code, which, by the way, is a whole lot thicker than it used to be. There's an entire chapter with 18 or more sections in terms of standards for determining residency. It does start out with a presumption regarding residency, and the presumption doesn't mean that it is so. It certainly just means that that's where you start. When a person declares that the person is a resident, that's where you start. And then there has to be sufficient evidence to show that that is not correct. There are a number of also a number of sections that talk about a person's residence is the residence of their immediate family, and the reason Ms. Feist's name was brought in many times is that it appears that she has declared herself, at least as of December 30th of 2021, to be a resident of the state of Florida. And with that, there is a, see if I can find this section here. With that is a presumption that the residence of an individual is the place where the person's immediate family resides. And to the extent that Ms. Feist, as of December 30th, declared that Florida was her permanent residence, the question then becomes, does that become the presumptive place where Mr. Castellan resides as well? Given that, though, I do believe that there is a substantial amount of evidence that relates to Mr. Castellan's presence in St. Joseph County, the fact that he has been here for a long time. And I don't believe that the presumption, in fact, has been rebutted, that we start with the presumption, but we need to have enough evidence to show, in fact, that it has been presumpted if, in fact, we want to grant the petition. So given those comments from all of the board members, I would entertain a motion with respect to the petition of Mr. Booker.
I'll make a motion to deny Mr. Booker's candidacy challenge.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, let's then take a vote of the members of the board. The motion is to deny the candidacy challenge. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Okay. Mr. Booker, thank you very much. Actually, to the both of the parties, thank you very much for
Thank you.
bringing this issue here. This is a new one for us, and I think it's an important issue, you know, as it relates to the democratic process. We want to make sure that it's fair, transparent, and that we have candidates who are, so good luck to both of you in the fall, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Mr.
Appreciate your
Leone,
time.
may I make
Thank
one
you.
other comment, please?
Oh, sorry, there's another comment?
Please. Yes, I'm sorry. I would just like to also go ahead and add with me not being able to legally make appropriate statements, I would like to say that this will now, with the evidence that was provided on both parts, leave it up to the tax-paying voters of St. Joseph County.
All right, we will, I know not everybody wants to hear the remainder of our meeting, so we just have an updates on a few matters that we're continuing onward. So if we want to take just a very short break, a couple of minutes, if people want to leave, please go ahead and do that, and then we'll just kind of jump into some quick status reports and hopefully set our date for our next meeting. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, if you want to have discussions, please have it out in the hallway, please. All right, let's continue on with the meeting then. We just have updates on a few additional items. So the first is the ballot procedure review. We did receive a set of kind of a summary of office procedures was that from Penny?
Penny.
From Penny.
Penny did a
And
great job.
That was very helpful. I think what we want to do is take those and kind of compare them to the actual statutory procedures. Part of the problem, of course, is that the law is being updated on an annual basis. And this year, for example, we had a dozen different statutes that were passed by the legislature, all affecting election law in Indiana. So it's a bit of a challenge to kind of stay on top of that process as we go forward. And we want to make sure that as we get into the fall election that we're in fact doing things the right way. So we'll take that, we'll compare it with the statutory procedure, we'll tweak it as necessary, and then what I would like to be able to do is to actually set it out as a policy or procedure of the board, so we know we have something to reference and something to give people if there's a question about that. And then as the years go by, we of course can't update that and make it more accurate as we go along. So I don't know if we'll be ready by our next meeting, which I'm hoping will be just in a couple of weeks, to actually have that kind of review on the current procedures as compared to the statute. Mike, do you have a sense of that?
Probably not.
Probably not.
I'll let
Okay.
you know if we can
Well-
get it
well,
on
why don't
the
we put it on the
agenda.
agenda just for an update again, and if we don't have it done, we can at least see if we can set some kind of a date. We need to get stuff in place, obviously, with the election coming up in November. Next item we want to get a status report on is the video recording request. As folks may remember, Ben had made a request for video recordings in the clerk's office as it related to the ballot room, and then later made a request for an APRA request, Access to Public Records Act request, that it was independent and in his own name. And I would consider those as somewhat different standards. I think that he has narrowed his request down significantly. The first part was for, I think it was video from 5 cameras for a substantial period of time, and now it's for 1 camera for,
The period where absentee ballots began being accepted up to primary day,
okay,
just on the one.
just on the 1 camera that actually looks at the ballot room door.
Yes.
And so because this is an access to public records request, one of the things that we did was we asked the folks at the Election Division and the Secretary of State's office for some input. The feedback that we got was that video recordings are not considered election records as such.
That was the opinion of one attorney from, was it Angie Nussmeier's attorney?
Right, it was Angie's, and then backed up by Luke Britt also in somewhat forms. We never heard back from the Republican Party at all on it.
Yeah, so the public access counselor weighed in also that these were not election records as such. So to the extent that this is an access to public records request, I think it is a matter that was responded to by the county commissioners, and it's really outside of our jurisdiction since you're going to be receiving it that way. So I think at this point, we're done.
Well, could I ask, what would be the scope, if I asked, which I think I did, from my position as an election board member, what sort of scope, did we receive any sort of opinion on what that would entail?
I don't think we did.
Here's the problem is, one of the concerns is it the clerk's office that controls these cameras? Is it the commissioners as the owners of the building that control the cameras? And then is there any issues with privacy, right? As Mr. Britt stated in his email, there's no expectation of privacy in a public building. And so it's an interesting question because I believe the clerk's office got a grant which paid for the cameras, and I believe one of the clerks had access to possibly log in and as well as IT to see what was going on the cameras. And right now, the county is going through a process of putting all of their camera systems in one, and so the sheriff's department and others have access to them. So it's not necessarily owned by the election board or controlled by the election board. So
Certain cameras are, if we would remove those cameras, none of them would be showing any activity in the clerk's office.
right.
So as it relates to the 1 camera in the hallway, my understanding is the video has been transferred to a separate drive, and that is
Mr.
available,
Warfield is
or-
going to get it to the reduced scope request to me, and I'll be able to provide it to you.
Okay,
So we're okay on that then?
yes.
Okay, I think at this point, this is no longer, this particular request is no longer an election board issue. On the other hand, I do think that
If I
it's,
could intervene,
Yeah.
I do think the key issue is something that should be addressed before fall, just a matter of who has them and how many.
It's next on his
Oh,
agenda.
that's my next item. You're right, you're.
I read your mind.
Half step ahead of me
Yep.
here. So the other issue that has come up that we've been dealing with is the issue of ballot room keys. And one thing that we need to look at, the statute itself is not particularly helpful. And Rita, what's the Indiana Code site on that again? You gave that to me before.
The Indiana Code 3-11-10-10 states that during the period absentee ballots are received, each county election board shall keep the ballots in a cabinet box or a room, which there are 2 locks, one for each appointed party of the boards. Each day, the absentee ballots shall be placed in the cabinets, boxes, or room under the direction of the appointed members of the board, which would be Mr. Leone and Mr. Horvath. If an appointed member cannot be present each day, then the member shall designate someone from the member's party to be present with the key at the time the ballots are secured in the time the lock is opened the next day. The key of each appointed member shall be kept in a secure manner determined by the appointed member.
So there are some gaps there. One of the issues that we saw was that the county engineer has a key to the, or maybe access to both keys to the room because of the fact that there is equipment. There's HVAC equipment in there, there's electrical equipment, and the county engineer typically has access to everything in case there's an emergency of some sort, whether it be a flood or a fire. We certainly don't want to have ballots, destroyed because it takes a couple of hours to get the keys to get into the room. So this is an issue that I think is important from a number of points of view, and the statute just doesn't give us enough guidance, I think, to kind of go on its own. So I think what we're trying to do is determine best practices. I know that Rita has made some inquiries to other counties and has learned of a number of different procedures, but nothing in writing. Is that my understanding, Rita, that it's available?
Right, and I also talked to the Indiana Election Division again, and they said that the law, their process is stated in the law. It's stated there that there should be 2 separate locks, which we do have. Each board member receives a key, which they did, that the member then who can't make it is supposed to appoint somebody by proxy, and it says nowhere in there that there should be limited keys. And my stance as an elected official and administrator of the elections has a duty to perform and secure the integrity of the election. And if somebody isn't there or unable, or a key gets lost, which I've heard from numerous clerks that keys were lost or people weren't showing up, that we still have the responsibility to the voters and to the candidates in St. Joseph County to provide an election. And so be it. If I had to open up the door, the law doesn't say that I couldn't have a key as an elected official to open up that door, along with, as I did do as a gesture of good faith and integrity of the election process, had a person from my office come with me and open up the door.
So what I would like to be able to do is I'd like to put everything in writing so that we have a very clear and specific policy on which the clerk's office can rely and in which the appointed board members can rely as well, but also have input from the county commissioners. The county commissioners have an interest in this room as it relates to the building itself and the safety and security of the entire room. So I think we have to, and also we want to make sure that the room is safe as it relates to the security of the ballots, and that's the key thing that the statute deals with. So I think what we may need to do is to kind of create our policy. We may be the first in the state if nobody else has it, but we need to create a policy and a set of procedures as to what we do under certain circumstances.
Agree. And I think the Association of Indiana Counties is also reviewing the legislative section of that rule with legislators that, there has to be integrity kept, and nobody is doubting that, you want 2 separate keys, but there's still a responsibility that has to be met.
Yep, and of course, the risk is that we can go ahead and develop a great policy, and then the legislature next February goes ahead and amends the statute in a way that makes us go back and do it all over again. But I still think it's important to go ahead and get this in place, so at least it gives us a foundation on which we can go ahead and everybody can rely on it. Not only us, not only county employees, but also the voters. We want the voters to make sure to feel comfortable that, in fact, the integrity of this process is being taken seriously and being handled properly. So we will work on that then to see if we could get this process started. All right. The only other item we have is getting a date for our next meeting.
We did check August 26th, which is a Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning. I know it's a little bit earlier, but there is a retirement party for Commissioner Castelny, and we would like to be respectful of that.
Okay. And Ben, is that okay with you at 9 a.m.? The
26th,
26th, Friday, the 26th, right, 9 AM.
9 a.m., that's good.
Okay, and so, and Mike also? All right. So we'll set the next meeting for Friday, August 26, 2022 at 9 AM in these chambers. Is that right? Okay. All right, that'll be our next meeting then. Any other business?
Do we want to provide public comment, time for public comment?
Public comment, yes, I don't want folks to go to the, the hearing itself. I don't know if we need to re-weigh in on the evidence on anything, but if anybody has any comment about the other items that are on the agenda, I think that would be appropriate. Is there any comment that folks want to give today? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries.
Aye.